There's nothing more heartbreaking than a stray dog. Though we're usually forced to leave them behind, most of us would love nothing more than just to scoop up every critter to see and whisk them away to a lifetime of happiness. But the owner of one Brazilian Hyundai dealership, this was far easier said than done. A certain pup continued to show up at his store each day. The dealer had no choice but to make sure the animal never stood outside his door again. However, it soon became clear this was no ordinary canine. The stray first began appearing outside the dealership in the spring of 2020, standing stoically at the front entrance, like in the hope of scoring some goodwill from the store's employees. For a time, the owner simply ignored the dog. After all, strays were nothing new to the people of Brazil. It's estimated that Brazil was home to around 30 million stray cats and dogs, with many of them dubbed community animals that lived in certain areas and survived off scraps and handouts. The owner assumed that eventually the dog would just move in search of new place to beg. But even as the days passed, the dog continued to plant himself firmly outside the dealership doors, staring at the employees with puppy dog eyes as if to say just a bite and a belly rub would do. Then on an especially rainy night, it became too much for the owner to bear. How could he possibly say no to that face? And so the owner decided to let the needy pooch spend a few nights inside the dealership to help him get back on his feet. The COVID-19 pandemic was running rampant at the time, so to get the stray off the street for even a day or two would certainly come as a welcoming respite. The employees at the dealership took the dog immediately, calling him Tuscan Prime, after the Hyundai Tucson and the Prime branch they worked at. They built him a small doghouse so he felt right at home during his stay and filled some dog bowls to the brim with food and water. There had been no need for begging this time around. A bath was also in order for the scraggly stray, as there was a good chance for Tucson hadn't seen soap and water in years. Clearly, the dealer and his employees weren't about to let this guest return to the street with a little TLC. Hopefully, he could catch an eye of a customer looking to add a new member to the family. While most strays often timid and frightened of new people, Tucson practically started running the place as soon as he stepped in through the door. From the way he interacted with the owners and other dealership employees, you never would have guessed he once lived on the streets. With customers, he even took things up a step further. You would have just thought prospective car buyers were there just for Tucson the way he was able to charm so many treats and belly rubs from them. He sure was a great salesman. This got the dealer thinking about the pup's future. What if he could give Tucson a forever home? Yet he wasn't talking about taking the dog back to his house. With how well Tucson got along with the employees and how much all the customers seemed to love him, the dealership decided to make a bold proposal to the Hyundai board to make Tucson the store's official mascot. After all, the company has always been pet-friendly, so now we decided to embrace this idea to practice too. Having our own pet precisely at a more complicated time like this, with so many abandoned animals, showroom manager Emerson Mariana told Top Motors Brazil, and as soon as Tucson was given the job, he got right to work. As the dealership's new professional consultant, Tucson was out on the floor day in and day out trying to match customers with the car of their dreams. He even had his own employee name and badge, making the whole arrangement totally legit. Test drives also fell under Tucson's duties. He may not have been able to reach the pedals, but he could definitely tell you if the windows were good for sticking out your head. On top of all of that, Tucson even put on his customer service skills to the test. Questions about vehicle? This representative was there to help. Safe to say, Tucson earned plenty of 5-star reviews, which is why it was long before word of Prime's newest employee reached the rest of Brazil's Hyundai branches. Pretty soon, the dealership were reaching out to have Tucson make an appearance. After all, people were practically flocking to Professional Pup's home branch just to pay him a visit and bring him some gifts. Never one to deny his customers or miss on a car ride, Tucson was more than willing to oblige. And so, Tucson took a road trip to tour a number of Hyundais on other dealerships around Brazil, meeting tons of fans, getting plenty of kisses along the way. In fact, Tucson had become such a notable name that even the bigwigs at Hyundai began to take notice. In fact, Tucson was even invited to visit actual Hyundai plants and facilities to meet these higher-ups face-to-face. The workers at his factory were no doubt thrilled to step off the production line for a chance to play with their new furry friend. Though Tucson couldn't stay with his new fans forever. By the time Tucson returned to his home branch, he was pooped. he was all ready to settle back into his days of car showings and customer service. Though there was still one big piece of news the folks at Hyundai had yet to break. Now that Tucson was Hyundai's most famous employee, corporate wanted to make sure everyone knew about him, not just the people who worked and visited their store. And so the marketing team planned for him to star in his very own series of national-wide Hyundai commercials. In just a matter of months, Tucson went from a lonely stray to the face of a global car company, all thanks to the generosity of one dealership owner and his employees. It was an incredible transformation, and one that happens far more often than you can think. Truly, all it takes is a little love and compassion to turn even the most mistreated and neglected animal's life around. They may not all wind up superstar like Tucson, but for a handful of down-on-their-luck cats and dogs, a little TLC was all they need to make a complete and total transformation. Jake was super depressed spending time in his small cage all day. The only thing he wanted to do was to get out and show the world how energetic he was. Once he found a family, he came alive. This poor cat had an owner who suffered from Alzheimer's and completely forgot she owned a cat much of the time. This feline could barely move at first place because of her fur, but soon she had a new clean coat. Look at how sad Buster and Keaton were when they were locked away. The two were found together among rubbles of a burnt building, and they were super friendly. Now their happiness is infectious. When this kitten first arrived at the shelter, she had an infection in both her eyes that made them water uncontrollably. Mucus impaired her eyesight, but with a little help, she was ready to see again the world clearly. When Animal Rescue found this tiny ball of hair, she looked like she was the daughter of Cousin It. With a little help from the organization's professional grooming service, she was kicking butt and taking names in no time. This poor chap was so malnourished, every one of his ribs was protruding through his skin. Rescuers brought him into a loving environment, and after 8 months of nutrition and attention, he was good as new. Chicago policemen found these two smiling pups, Emmy and Oscar, living in an abandoned building eating scraps. The officer brought them to a local shelter where workers cleaned them up, and Emmy was even adopted shortly after. This good boy was actually set to be euthanized. However, a worker from the SPCA fell in love with him immediately, and not only did she prevent him from being killed, but she adopted him too. This tiny fella's name is Frodo, and when he was first discovered, he was a mangled wreck. Although he did get one of his eyes removed due to infection, he cleaned up quite well. Poor little Holland was taken in by the Trio Animal Foundation in Chicago and given a world of assistance. She had bruises, cuts, and severely dry skin, but workers managed to help with every ailment. Little Miss Princess was found with a cone on her head and a pink bandage around her ear after surviving an attack from a bigger animal. She lost an ear but kept her dignity. Ruthie was the ripe age of 16 when her owners brought her into their home and gave her the love and respect she was lacking for so many years. Look at that smiling face now. Noah was severely underweight and malnourished when rescuers found her. Luckily, her foster family rejuvenated her to the fullest, and although they can't keep her, she'll certainly end up in a loving household. Originally named Stinky because of terrible breath, she was renamed Marnie by her new family, who had all her decaying teeth removed. The head tilt and tongue dangle is due to the vestibular syndrome, but it's adorable. This dog was on the verge of death due to internal issues and skin disorders when a rescue organization found her. After some TLC, she was back on her feet. This scrawny baby boy was so skinny his bones were almost ripping through his flesh. It was such a sad sight, but rescuers took him in, pumped him back up, and now he's ready for a T-bone steak. The only thing this pup had with her when she was found was a ragged toy to keep her company and offered comfort during a painful and lonely time. Shortly after she was adopted, she sprang back to life. The streets of Puerto Rico used to be where Barkley would roam without a purpose, eating garbage and receiving scowls for his appearance. After some time in a rescue home, his skin healed and a loving family adopted him. Not only was this little guy's fur insanely matted, he had skin infections over most of his body. It took 4 workers to carefully hack away at the fur for 12 hours, but they completed the mission proudly. It seemed like there was no cheering up to this sack of wrinkles when Tyson was first found abandoned in a junkyard. However, he had the willpower to pull through and find happiness at the end of his misery. Life in an animal shelter can be difficult and lonely for animals. Luckily for this little pooch, with heterochroma, one blue eye and one brown eye, he's found a family to give him a loving forever home. Now he'll never be alone again. Life looked once bleak for this adorable little chihuahua, so much in fact that he often spent hours staring at walls, hoping he'd be rescued someday. Well, that day finally came. Just look at the change in his demeanor. That's one happy dog. When a shelter animal is finally adopted by a caring pet owner, she can say goodbye to spending her days behind caged fences. Instead, it's time to say hello to long walks with her new human and roaming freely around her new home. Everyone knows that cats tend to be loners. They spend majority of their time either taking a nap or relaxing on a windowsill. Still, the difference between before and after being adopted can easily be seen in this one's facial expression. Wait, is this real life? This little snow-white cutie used to spend majority of his days in a tiny stall at his local animal shelter. Now that someone has given him a forever home, he can be seen outside enjoying the sun and taking lots of walks with his human. This brown and white pooch must have spent a lot of time scavenging for scraps of food out of garbage cans on the street. She was so malnourished that you can even see her spine and rib cage. Clearly, getting adopted was the best thing to ever happen to her. This cheeky stripped cat was merely a shadow of herself before being adopted by a loving family. Not only was the kitten clearly starving, but her overall demeanor seemed so much more solemn before finding a forever home. This little dog wears his hat on his sleeve. And his face. Just look at those sad eyes before he was adopted from the shelter. Compare that to the look at his face now, which just says it all. He found his happiness, and that meant getting to go home. It's not uncommon for stray animals to arrive to a shelter with scraps, injuries, or even diseases. Sure, this little cutie might have arrived with a leg injury, but as soon as she was adopted, she healed up quickly. It's hard to say whether this one-eyed cat was born that way or suffered an injury while stray and living on the street. Nevertheless, now that he's being adopted and has a safe place to rest at night, he can be sure to avoid getting into any scraps with any other strays. This tiny dog's long fur is a dead giveaway that he clearly hadn't been bathed in ages when arriving to the animal shelter. But once he was given a proper bath and brought outside to play in the sun, the difference was night and day. Stray animals have a way of getting themselves into a world of trouble when encountering certain dangerous animals like porcupines. Unfortunately for this dog, he had to learn the lesson the hard way. But now that he has a human to give him guidance, you can rest assured that won't happen again anytime soon. This wrinkly little pup was clearly suffering from a case of mange when he arrived at the animal shelter. But once a person adopted him and gave him some love, he was looking so much healthier. Way to go, dude! You're on the right track. This cute dog must really have a family who shows him love and care. Just look at how happy he is to have his picture taken once he was adopted. He obviously didn't feel this way when he was still living in the animal shelter. When a veterinarian examined this pooch after she arrived at the shelter, it was clear she had been severely malnourished. Just look at her rib cage. Not a worry though. Just look how happy she was going for a walk with her new human. Nice leash, little one. This adorable kitty is barely recognizable from when he was first discovered living all alone on the street. He seemed much more content after he had finally been adopted. That's the transition from a look of fear and loneliness to one of love and happiness. This little white pooch was in serious need of some proper grooming while living on the streets. But luckily, when he found a forever home, he received just what he needed. Now he looks svelte with this new do. When rescuers from animal shelter found this poor little guy living on the street, he was now understandably sad and distressed. Now he's all smiles. Maybe it has something to do with being adopted. Though it probably didn't hurt that his favorite baseball team finally won the World Series. This poor little guy had a tough time getting adjusted to life at the animal shelter. But now that someone gave him a place to call his forever home, he's all smiles and a whole lot of tongue too. Life in a shelter was far from what this adorable pooch deserved. Now that he's living in a forever home, he can roam around and play in the snow as much as he wants. That's a priceless look of pure happiness right there.